Oh, we're live. Hi, Russ. Welcome to Winter with Grace.
Hi, Grace. It's great.
Oh, I lost you for a minute. Can you hear me?
Oh, am I
Oh, you're
back?
back.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay.
You're back. You're back. Okay, perfect. Hi. Okay, so I want to start with a little bit of your background. So you started your career in robotic research, and you work at Microsoft, Trulia, and Dropbox, and Meta, and obviously you have sold two companies in the past. Why don't we start with like what were some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career that kind of shape you into who you are today?
Um, yeah, I've gotten a lot of help over the years and just advice from people. And one of the things I liked, I remember in college asking people who were way out of Stanford, like later in their career, like, tell me, like the path that you were on and like, how you made decisions. And the thing I heard from a couple people was at the time, it all felt random and just doing the best I can. And now in retrospect, I can give you a story about like how it all made sense, but they're like, it didn't make sense when I went through it. And
Mhm.
I found that very comforting because as I've tried to make decisions and like work on things that are interesting, there's never a right answer, but I can give you like some like clear sounding path. Like, I knew what I was doing the whole time, and it does sound nice when you put it together. But to the extent someone is in college or like earlier in their career, and they're like, oh, like that's amazing. How'd you do that thing? It's like, well, ask interesting questions, like work on things you feel drawn to. Like the advice of today will probably not be the advice in a few years looking back at today. And so somehow like luck and just kind of follow what I'm interested in. In undergrad, I worked on robots, as you pointed out, and that was fun because I didn't know what I was going to do in undergrad, but someone gave me the advice to work on to learn about the hardest stuff now because I won't go back and learn it later. I was like, oh, that makes sense. Robots are great. And so I worked on robots, and it was really fun. I learned a ton. Got to work in a lab at Stanford with this guy Ken Salisbury who ran it, and we got to go visit NASA and like learn about what they were doing. This is 2004, and so 20 plus years ago. And
Mhm.
robots still fun. I decided I like the software part better. And so I ended up doing my master's at Stanford in computer science in my undergrad in like a mix of EE and CS.
Mhm.
But yeah, getting started there was a great place to get started because people are just nice, interesting, working on challenging problems, and kind of gave me some good exposure to, I don't know, engineering and technology, and it made it more approachable. And then I got to start figuring out what I felt more drawn to and what I liked more and why.
For sure. I wonder, so like, I mean, for the first time when you're starting a company, I think like you talk about this in like another different podcast about like, it was kind of like aqua hire. So can you share a little bit more about like what was the kind of like lessons there? And then when I guess like for aqua hire, typically do they poach you or you poach them? I feel like I think I remember the story was kind of like you met the team at Facebook and then people kind of like the product itself didn't really quite work out, but like it kind of like got acquired because of you guys are very talented. So I guess like maybe if you could share a little bit more about like since like nowadays in the AI realm, everybody is like getting acqui-hired the like or not everybody, but like a lot of people are getting acqui-hired or like because of their like great talent. Maybe from the talent perspective, like or talent and founder perspective, like how did that kind of transition happen? And then what were your kind of like lessons from there?
Well, there are a lot of questions there. The first company I started was called Pursuit, and
Mhm.
I never thought I'd be like an entrepreneur as like the job title because like I don't know what that means. It's kind of a catch-all. Like no
Mhm.
one likes starting a company. Everyone wants to have like
Mhm.
started or is running a successful
Mhm.
company. But I do like working on things I find interesting, and it was fun to work with some other startups. And then I started Pursuit with two people I knew and had worked with at Trulia engineers. And Louis Eisberg and Nick Letourneau. And we had an idea that came out of like our own work experience at another company. I'd run their engineering team, and it was really hard to hire engineers. And so it was a referral product that would kind of figure out who in your network would be best for a job, and then like recommend them to you, or you could like search, you could get them to like search who they knew. And so it was like splitting the referral bonus. This idea has come up so many times over the years since then. No one's really made it work super well,
Mhm.
but we had an idea and we built it. We had a bunch of other ideas, but what happened was we just dove in, like, we have this problem, other people must have had this problem, we built it, we actually got like 30 plus companies signed up using it with their own jobs and like thousands of users. And looking at the data, we were like, oh, this is not going to work like we think it's going to work.
Mhm.
The people were recommending outside of the system and they weren't using it like we thought they were going to use it. And then it wasn't clear like how to make a business out of it, even though there was like a need there. So we were going to pivot to the next idea on our list. It took us a whole year too, which is like everything takes longer than you think it's going to take. And we were like, oh, we'll just test this in a few months and see what happens and then move on next. But it takes longer. And so we were going to pivot to the next idea on our list. And we were fortunate that like Facebook had been playing around with it, some of the engineering managers there, and then LinkedIn was also aware of it. And so we were going to pivot, and then we were like, oh, maybe we just go to Facebook. They were like, oh, like, why don't you just come work at Facebook? I went to undergrad at Stanford, and so a lot of people I knew in undergrad went to Facebook back before it was like a big company or a cool company. And at that time in 2010, 2011, still Facebook hadn't changed their name. It was like, hasn't had an IPO yet. It was like growing like crazy.
Oh, I think the sound is gone.
Built-in microphone.
It's back. It's back. It's back.
Okay, great, good. Sorry. Apple and its wisdom decided my phone was the better microphone for a second.
Oh no.
The Facebook needed smart people. They were willing to they're just trying to find smart people to work on the company. And so they're like, hey, just come work here. And so acqui-hires, I get the question often like, oh, how do I sell my company? And acqui-hires are just the company wants to work with you for one reason or another. It's hard unless you have a pre-existing relationship or unless you're working on something very specific that company wants from you to make that happen. Companies are bought and sold type of thing. But because I knew people there, we were fortunate enough. We went and interviewed there. We went and interviewed at LinkedIn as well. Decided we liked Facebook more, and the thought process was like, well, Facebook's going to do really well, so we could just stay here for a while, and then it could be like our next like seed funding or something. And in acqui-hires, just you get a little bit more than you would otherwise get. Sometimes you actually get like less than you would otherwise get. Google famously is famous for being like very generous, like finding the people they want and just paying for them. So acqui-hires have gone in and out of fashion over time. It is useful to acquire a team of people who have existing knowledge that you need, that you can't find hiring one-offs, or a team that can work together on something. Remember at Facebook, just watching them buy other companies, like there were really smart acqui-hires they did because they needed expertise, and because of internal politics and other things, they just couldn't build it up internally. So it's a long way of saying like it made sense for us at the time. It felt like we were failing for what it's worth because we had raised some money, and so I'd been out pitching it, and you're pitching people like it's going to be huge, and then turn around and be like, just kidding, I don't think it's going to work. We're gonna pack up. Feels terrible because you're like letting go, you're failing. But in retrospect, I'm very happy that we went to Meta instead of like continuing on that path, or even picking the next idea on the list, because it was a great experience being at Meta. Seeing them go public was really interesting. Learned a ton while I was there, and then you can always go try again, which I did. Left Meta and started what became DocSend as the second company. So yeah, a lot of lessons out of the first company. Another one was just to be more thoughtful about what you build before you build it, because it's going to take longer than you think it's going to take. And probably my biggest regret out of Pursuit was that I could have figured out why it failed before we built the product, but I thought about it more. So with DocSend, we spent longer vetting out the idea and talking about like, oh, let's write the post-mortem on why this failed. And so we went through more ideas before we got to one that we stuck with.
Maybe we could talk about DocSend. I definitely feel like this is like a really great idea, but I feel like it's also kind of like very high likelihood of someone copying you. So like I feel like the technology mode is like different than maybe the go-to-market mode. And obviously you guys done like such a great job. Like today, like I was literally sending my little deck on DocSend like yesterday, and like I wonder maybe what could start with like at the beginning, how did you vet the idea, and then we can move on from there.
Yeah, and it's a good point that you're like, oh, that doesn't seem like it's maybe very defensible. And Yeah, it's interesting to me that so many people use DocSend still,
Mhm,
and people will say, "Oh, well, obviously that was a great idea," and that's funny to me because no, it was not obviously a good idea. Like when we started the company, all the people I knew and worked with before were all like, why are you doing this? This is a terrible idea. No one has a problem here. Like, and even if you build it, how will you defend it? It's a feature. Someone else is going to build the feature.
mhm,
And so it wasn't obvious that it was a thing worth building. Also, product-led growth did not exist in 2013. Like,
mhm,
sure, it did in theory, but there weren't great examples. And so this is one reason why I say the prevailing wisdom of today will probably
mhm,
not be the prevailing wisdom of like 5 or 10 years from now.
mhm,
So when we started DocSend, terrible idea, not defensible at all, like not going to work clearly. And then, everyone was like, oh man, Russ has lost his mind or something. Like, I guess everyone gets to go work on
mhm,
what they want to work on, but we'll see how that goes. But for us, the reason we liked it was we like good usability. We like Dave, Tony,
mhm,
and I. We all went to undergrad at Stanford together. We'd all worked together before at another company, and we like things that are like usable, that make sense for the end user. We didn't really want to do something consumery because that feels
mhm,
just too much of a roll the dice type of thing. And we're like, I don't
mhm,
think we're cool enough to do something consumery. We're not with the trends or whatever, but
mhm,
we're like, we can do something that's B2B oriented, but like
mhm,
specific. And so with DocSend, the idea came up because I'd interned at Dropbox before. Tony had also worked in another company that was in like the documenty space.
mhm,
And so we had some familiarity, and we're like, why are people still sending attachments? This is silly. Something like Dropbox means you don't need to email yourself attachments. Like that used to
mhm,
be a thing, which is wild. So you're like, oh, great. Yeah, you don't have to email yourself attachments. It just show up in multiple locations. It's stored somewhere else. But why are people still sending them externally? There are so many ways to send a link and not an attachment. Why aren't they using that? And so just kind of started as curiosity there. And our like what we couldn't prove was a bad idea was that if we added enough value to the sender and we made it really easy for the recipient, we could change that behavior. And there's just so many
mhm,
inherent benefits of sending a link or sending a pointer rather than sending the actual file, that we were like, yeah, someone needs to do this. Like we found examples of people sending big PowerPoint files, but they didn't understand that fonts aren't embedded in PowerPoint files unless you turn on a setting. So they'd have like a fancy font that on the other end would just never render.
mhm,
So it looks
mhm,
like garbage. On the other side, they had
mhm,
no idea. That looks fine
mhm,
for me, terrible on the other end. You're like, how would you know that? Like that's like very unintuitive. People sending giant Keynote files were like, do you realize that people don't have Keynote on a Windows device? And so the state of the art was sending a PDF. And yeah, so we just followed that thread, gave it to people, got the feedback on it. And so the idea was that it would be horizontal technology,
mhm,
and document analytics was the very first kind of like thing we called it, which didn't
mhm,
end up being what it was, but the product was the same at the end. Like our pitch deck with what is in the product ended up being like what the product was by and large. So it just took a while. Some of the go-to-market stuff was unintuitive to us. We learned a lot, and it is fascinating that it is still so prevalent because it is copyable. But if it's pretty cheap and it
mhm.
works really well, then something else has to be 10x better than it. And it's hard to be 10x better than something that just like works and does the job, and like everyone's kind of accepted it. So
Mhm.
that's more defensible than people give it credit for.
I wonder, like, were you doing any, like, kind of, like, growth hacking and stuff, like, at the very beginning to actually get this ball rolling? Or, like, what was the early traction kinda look like? Because I think you talk about this in a different podcast that, like, when you exited, like, your investor almost, like, kind of forgot about the company exists, or, like, just, like, they didn't really see, like, this coming because, like, it grew very fast later on. So how do you think about like the entire growth journey at the beginning? What kind of traction do you have to see to validate this idea actually work compared to your maybe your ideal list?
Yeah, growth hacking. I have a lot of ideas on what that is, and I like it. We never really got that to work for DocSend. We also never got like paid acquisition to work.
Mhm,
Um, and I've always admired scenarios where people do that. Like Dropbox itself had like this viral video that Drew created when they launched it, and that got their initial traction. Another company, like a friend of mine, Drew, has a company, Create Anything, and they got like over 3 million views on their like X post about this new launch they did. And I was like, how'd you do that? He's like, I don't know. We launched this great video, but like, wow, people like
mhm,
they had this like wow moment that like went viral. And so
mhm,
a lot of companies I've seen will have like a growth hacking moment or like this like crazy thing that'll happen. And then, you're like, how do you recreate that? And, you're like, it's kind of hard to deterministically recreate it. For DocSend, hopefully this is inspiring for other people starting a company, which is we never had like an, oh my God, this is it moment. Like it was just steadily chipping along. Like if you look at the growth curve, it starts real slow and it takes like 5 years before it starts to like kind of like exponentially take off. And there's no one thing along the way. The biggest driver of growth the whole way through the product was word of mouth. So people often think that the product was viral, and we did want that property in it. That's one of the reasons we liked it, was that, people send links to other people. Like this is great because you're spreading awareness. And then we were actually very intentional about not making DocSend front and center because that would make people not want to use it. So we made it something that would feel normal, like you've already seen it before, but then like subtle enough that you're like, oh, what is this thing that you're using? And so it wasn't viral directly, although that did happen a little bit, but word of mouth was the biggest driver of growth for the product at the time. And then later on, some content marketing worked well, like the fundraising research that we did for it was good for spreading awareness. But some of it's just like have a product people like, and they tell other people about it. And so that was pretty interesting to just see and follow. But it doesn't feel as sexy or as like, you just make a great soundbite of like this one cool hack type of thing.
I love that. I wonder, maybe we could start talking about Distill, because I think like right now, since you have like worked on 2 different companies that both are sold, and then obviously I think for DocSend it's like very successful for you. And why don't we talk about like obviously I feel like Distill is like a product that everybody need as well, because I can showcase a little bit on the website of the demo. So essentially it is kind of like research for your just like the people that you're email with. Maybe we could you could start with like sharing a little bit more about like how did you kind of like thinking about the product, and then how do you guys start it for this new company?
Sure. And actually what this shows is the Gmail plugin for us, but we're going to redo our marketing site because we've learned a lot since we put this up as a landing page for it. But yeah, the core insight for Distill is saving you from Googling for a person or company. So if DocSend was don't email a PDF, Distill would be, hey, you don't need to like Google for that person or company. It's just always struck me as crazy that that's the state of the art, to Google for someone. And the reason LLMs are helpful for that is there's the which grace gong are we talking about? Like there are multiple of them. And so as you're well aware, and we can use LLMs to basically like, as we like try to find all the stuff about you, like, is this the right grace? Is this a different grace? And that problem is subtly difficult. While I was at Meta, they were trying to do something kind of related. The product I worked on was called Pages, anything that has like a business presence on Meta. And so we were putting together like the product graph and like the interest graph. And so we're trying to figure out like, is this the same or different for like companies? And it's really hard to disambiguate. Like entity disambiguation is like a technical sounding term for it. And you wouldn't think it's like that important, but if it's wrong, like if we're wrong, we like combine in the wrong grace, you can't trust the system. So to deliver on the value of like, hey, we'll save you time Googling a person or a company, you have to be pretty good at understanding like programmatically, is this the same or a different person? And so I like that. There's like clear value in like just summing it all up about a person or a company. But the interesting thing for me is like, what do we do with that data then? So things like, oh, we'll just index everybody you know from like who you've been emailing to or who you're connected to various places. We'll go find everything about them. We also do the same for the companies. So we go off and every company you've worked at, we go off and find all the information about them, because you can tell a lot about a person by where they've worked at. And so you can infer information there. And that's useful for recruiting, that's useful for sales. It's just useful for like getting advice from people. So Distill is professionally oriented, but on top of like this, very simple look up a person or company functionality, like the workflows on top of that are what become really fun and interesting for like searching your network, connecting with people, searching their networks, kind of like looking for things that are harder to find anywhere else. Like, who do I know that knows about battery tech? That sort of thing. Even just basic, like, what do I have in common with this person ahead of a meeting? Or like, is this company similar to that other company? So there's just like a lot of use cases that we see, which is fun for me because it's very product led. We can do one thing well and then fan out and do a bunch of things on top of that that are interesting.
Mm. I wonder, since like I think we just talk about like when you built like a 10x product and then when it's easy to use, like people like kind of like catch on or and start using it. Like obviously, I feel like this is like another really great function, but I feel like there's a lot of like email tooling that are kind of like doing very similar-ish things. So like, how do you think about the moat and like differentiation when it comes to creating a product that kind of like it's like in a very useful but also competitive space.
Yeah, and this was the same for like DocSend at the beginning. They're like, this thing exists in 20 other places, you're gonna fail. And it's like, well, if it exists somewhere, but it's too hard to use, then does it exist there? So Microsoft has this saying that if a user can't find a feature, it doesn't exist. And I think that's really funny because Microsoft has a lot of features that nobody can find. But it's true as a saying and as a piece of advice. So for Distill, even though this exists in a lot of other places, doing it well is hard. So if we're going to be really great at that, then people will still use it. As an example, for like a meeting prep tool, there are a lot of meeting prep tools. Like there are a lot of like note taking in meetings. But if ahead of a meeting, like what Distill does is it'll send you just like a daily brief on the people you're meeting with today, new external people, not people you've met with, new external people, what you've got in common, an interesting highlight about them, and like maybe some recent kind of stuff that's happened to them. To do that really well, you need to go like exhaustively search the internet and like make sure this is all the right grace. Like, so like that's a hard problem. That's a problem that you need a human. So usually your assistant or an EA will do that if anyone's going to do that ahead of time. So that seems like a feature, and other systems try to add that feature. But if you use that feature in other systems, you probably have a trust breaking moment pretty quickly where it either didn't find something or it found the wrong thing. Similar in like GPT, where you ask it about a person, someone really famous, someone with a really unique name, it'll find some stuff, but it's not exhaustive and it's often wrong once you get out of like the famous people category. So for Distill, even if you're using some other tool, that like daily brief email on like new people and information about them, you're still probably going to use Distill for that. But I'm not going to try to go do like note taking in meetings. Like I don't see any reason why we'd be the best at that. So core competency, and then fan out to like, what can we do and be like really good at in a way that people would use us, and also use another system like we're complementary to it. Or in some cases, like we just need to kind of like win versus some other tooling. But deciding, where we compete is important. But part of being product led is being patient, just being the best at something, being easily understood by people. And then the kind of the nemesis for something that's like product led would be something that's like vertical specific or kind of like upmarket. And so there are other tools that have like some like okay feature set from Distill, and then that's hard to compete against, especially like at a company-wide level. They're like, I don't know, this enterprise tool has this feature set, we don't need you, which is why you start with like end users and people who like don't have those enterprise tooling sets. But it is a very fun debate, and it is interesting to see how it plays out in terms of what people choose to use and where people spend their time.
I wonder, I feel like it sounds like it's like very focused on like the product and then the UX. I guess like when it comes to the first batch of customer, like how do you think about like who do you identify as like the core people that you're targeting? Would it be like, for I guess like for DocSend, like one of the major use cases is like people who are raising startup funding, right? Like they want the information to be private, but like they don't want to just like send like a PDF, then they want to track where people are stopping or like any salesperson. But like as for like email, I feel like email is like a product for everyone. So like where do you start as like, the core user group that you're targeting?
Sure. And to your point about email, like we have on our website the Gmail plugin, but most people actually just use Distill directly. And so just come to the site. So that's for the next version, like Gmail plugin. Yeah, it's great. I use it all the time, but it is not like the main thing. There are also a lot of other plugins. So I've realized it's like, it can be kind of competitive if you have too many plugins, but you don't need that to work well. That's not like that's our core battleground or whatever. But to your question about how do you decide on like the core audience who you're going after, prevailing wisdom now is to make money quickly, go very specific, go to a vertical, especially B2B, go up market. And it's like time to like selling, and it like very quickly becomes the right kind of like sales metrics. My experience with DocSend was once we got the product right and we got some kind of inherent like built-in growth to it, like evergreen awareness generating mechanisms, either the product itself, word of mouth, content, marketing, monetization was a lagging indicator. And so, we saw it go like spike. We sold it when it was 15 million in ARR, and it went way, way past that, even like ignoring the synergies with Dropbox just on its own as a baseline. So that's how I like to go about it in terms of like focus on engagement, focus on usability, and then like make sure you can monetize, but like add that as a secondary thing. In terms of like which vertical to go after, I like thinking of things in terms of psychologies and workflows for users. And so for DocSend, it's used by a lot of people, and a lot of them wouldn't say they have anything in common with each other. But for me, the unifying thread is all of them are external facing and working on high value deals. And it's like B2B. Like that's where you send documents, they're business oriented. If you're sending it to your coworker, you don't care. That's a collaboration use case. You're sending it externally, and like a pitch deck is a good example of that. You're sending it to someone else, you poured your life into this document, and you just want to know what happens to it and keep control of it. And there's a bunch of stuff there. And it's too specific for Microsoft or Google to focus on, or anyone who's like really owning the document generation, or Adobe. Although now it's getting bundled in other places, as it should. But for Distill, the psychology we're targeting is somewhat similar to DocSend, even though the product is very different. But it's external facing, B2B, high value. Scenarios where, I'm just meeting you for the first time, but it's smart for me to show up prepared. It's smart for me to research you. One of the things that makes me feel good about Distill is that it helps you create more meaningful connections, which is just generally fulfilling to do as a person. But in business, especially anything that's high value, it's also something you need to do to be successful at your job. So fundraising is another of those examples. But for me, like looking at your background and highlights on Distill, it's fun to see like that you cite Oprah Winfrey and Sarah Blakely as major influences. It's nice. I feel like I know you better. Like there's something there that makes you more human to me. So we're targeting that psychology with Distill, and then fundraising, also a good use case for it. Investing, sales, recruiting, but there are a lot of client services. There are a lot of external facing scenarios where that's relevant. It also has to be someone who's got like up and coming, a chip on their shoulder. They have to care. People who are already in a position of power, like I'm really important. You're coming to me. I don't need to research you. I don't care. You're like, oh, I need Russ to like me or something. Then like you will research me to make sure that, you show up well. So for Distill, we're catering to the person who cares about showing up well, who's doing something important, who wants to kind of like know about the other person ahead of time, or find people who are very specifically the right fit for whatever they're looking for. So like more intelligent targeting. Who do I know? Who do you know that could give me advice on something? So there are a lot of like just pretty general use cases, and there's some like common workflows that come out of this, but I think of it as like what psychology are we targeting for Distill? But yeah, right now I can like connect with you on Distill and then ask the question, who does Grace know that's an angel investor or a VC investor that does Series A and has invested in anything with product-led growth or whatever else I'm looking for, and it'll do all the sifting and give me the evidence back and give me the people.
Wow.
Fun. It also goes through and figures out how people know each other. So it's like, oh, Grace and this person work together. So like that level of like detail for someone who is the right psychology is really useful information.
For sure. How is this different from like deep research? Before you came on, I obviously also deep researched you. So, but I wonder like, how do you think about like the technology moat side of things, or maybe like if there is none, which is like totally fine, since like I feel like DocSend did like such a good job on like being a very simple product. How do you think about like the technology moat, or like what are some kind of like technology that you're excited about and to like kind of like empowering like yourself to making the Distill better?
It's a good question. And I would rephrase that as, let's say what you're working on is a good idea and people like it. How do you prevent someone else from coming along just copying you and putting you out of business, especially like a big company that already has distribution and reach, which it's a great question to ask if you're an investor or if you're just deciding what to work on. And, generally to the question, like, why wouldn't Google do this? Why wouldn't Facebook do this? Why wouldn't fill in your big company do this? There's no sure answer to that. With DocSend, I went around and talked to people, went to Dropbox, and I went to Box, I went to a bunch of other companies, and I was like, why don't you build this? And they were like, oh, maybe we will later. And then we got some acquisition offers, and we were just not going to work on that. We're going to work on something else. So I was like, you're really not going to do this. So in my mind, if something is more than a couple of years out on someone's roadmap, they're probably not going to do it, or at least it's in question if they're going to do it. And then if they do actually do it, like I remember Carta decided to compete with DocSend. I still think they have like data room stuff in Carta, but it's hard to find. And I don't anecdotally run across it. So even if a big company does copy you, if they don't do a great job, if they don't make it simple, then especially if it's something important, even if you get something for free in another system you've got, you're probably going to use the thing that actually works for you if it's something important enough. So for Distill versus like a deep research, when deep research came out, I was like, uh-oh, is this going to be like so good that like what we're working on with Distill is just like, no longer needed, which could happen. But no, like it'll get the wrong person in there, or it'll go down the wrong path. And then the cycles of turnaround are like really slow. And also I'm doing it from scratch every time. I gotta wait. I'm impatient. So for Distill, we're building out an index. It's like once we've researched Grace Gong, we have that index. Other people who go look you up, like we're reusing it, and then we're adding to it over time. So it is basically like doing deep research on people and companies, except that we're saving it. And there's a lot more logic on the back end for like looking at a piece of content and then saying, is this the same or a different Grace? So we actually build up kind of like a low level detective thing around like, what does this Grace? This Grace is a podcaster. That is a thing. So we find a piece of content and we're like, is this the same Grace or different Grace? We have this information that we compare it against. And the deep research stuff isn't tailored to people and companies that specifically. So it'll be interesting to see how it evolves over time, because I can't guarantee you that it'll always be the case that Distill will be really differentiated. But so far, like that is very differentiating, that it is much more predictable, that you're going to get a good experience in Distill, and it's also going to hook up information like in other ways that is not hooked up in doing deep research.
I wonder, so like, how do you, since like you mentioned, like you guys will index the information, like do you refresh every 2 weeks? Because I feel like maybe my information changed, like I start working at X company instead of this, like, so how do you kind of like keep things like fresh? And for the first time when so-and-so search someone, like how long does it take to like recreate a profile? And just out of curiosity, like is there any like preparatory data? Because I kind of feel like whenever I start using deep research, I can't really search stuff that are like, my relationship with Ross, or like just like a lot of the stuff that are like involved with like third party information. How do you guys like kind of like get past these like system to like acquire these like data that are more proprietary?
Yeah. So first off, like your connections in various locations are yours, not the system. So you can get that information out. It's annoying though, because like if you export LinkedIn, it'll just give you some information, it doesn't give you that much. But then you're like, oh, how do I turn around and enrich this information? And so then if you like upload a bunch of stuff to like, ChatGPT, you say, okay, here are my connections. It like doesn't save them. It doesn't enrich all of them. It's not very good at enriching all of them. It's the same problem we just talked about, compounded across a lot of people. So for Distill, import your connections, we enrich them, we keep them. And so like it is nice that Distill is that index of people. And we'll build out some more functionality around that. You can hide people you don't really know when you're looking at like mutual connections to folks. So there's more to do there. But yeah, the short answer is like, it's nice to have a system where you can import who you know, and then it's all the other information about them. We also make it easier for you to export it if you want to. So our model is less around keep the data tightly held, and it's more about be very useful workflow on top of that data, so people want to use you or us for like getting things done. So that's it then is up to us to make sure we're useful with that information. But yeah, it is nice to have one place to kind of put this information and be able to share it with others or be able to search it. The functionality doesn't exist anywhere else, to your point. Like it's annoying, it's frustrating. So like how do we get around it? Well, we make it easy for you to give us that data, and then we make it easy for you to go do things with it.
For sure. When it comes to like go to market, are you planning on like just like I guess like do you have like a go to market strategy in place? And since like I feel like in the AI era, like not only like the big company, I feel like sometimes like just like random people start building stuff on Lovable is like a threat to some degree, right? So like I mean these are people that like you never know exist. They're not the big tech company who are like ignoring a certain problem, but they just like randomly show up. Obviously, I feel like every day we're hearing like crazy information. I think like someone yesterday on like the Forbes $50 billion company or something list, a future billion-dollar company, some people are just like a one I'm not sure if it's a 1% company or like a very small company that are doing millions of dollars. Um and I wonder how do you think about these like um what is like the go to market strategy? Number 2 is like, the competitive landscape from the I guess like the non-traditional like uh vibe coders.
Yeah, the vibe code. Yeah. I guess on the second one, it is worth asking, like, if something you're working on is a feature versus a product, and like how difficult is it?
Mhm,
It's nice that something is difficult because
mhm,
that means it's harder for a vibe coder to recreate it. And I do think of startups as being the much more likely competitors to what we're building. First of all, there's the question: is what we're building useful at all to anybody? Do people like it? First
mhm,
off, and if no, then it doesn't really matter. If yes, then like, oh, are we going to have a big competitor? Is like a big company going to compete with you? And I'm less concerned about that than I am, yeah, another startup like in the race, like winning. Um, and so this being a somewhat difficult technical challenge is great, as not a huge moat, but like enough of a moat that someone couldn't like vibe code it in a weekend type of thing.
mhm,
Because data cleaning, hooking up data, like grabbing unstructured information. So like Googling for the startup and seeing the articles about it and inferring from those articles who they've raised money from and how much and who are the people on that deal. And then you're like, oh, and who is that fund? What else is that fund invested in? Like scraping their website, scraping the people on the website, like following this like chain. And then they're formatted differently. It, like you're looking at articles and it has recommended other articles at the bottom, and then you conflate the two, and there's like all sorts of compounding problems to make the data clean and dependable. And so, yeah, if you like play around with it a little bit, you're like, oh, it's easy. I can scrape that. That's not a problem. Then trying to do that at scale though and following it is hard. So that is great. I'm not too worried about someone recreating that in a weekend. It's possible though that that depth or that accuracy isn't important sometimes, and so like some other less accurate tool or GPT is fine. It's good enough. It's fine. Like that's a
mhm,
competitor to us. So I like keeping an eye on like what other startups are doing, what other people are doing. To your point about like, oh, one person, $50 billion company, the FOMO view, I think, is a little less helpful. Like, sure, like we would all love to be the one person $50 billion company tomorrow. That sounds lovely. How do you do that? Like, I don't know. So if there's a clear playbook there, would love to read it. The only path I know how to go down is like to be patient, to be curious, to like keep iterating. We joked with DocSend that we'd be an overnight success after a decade. And we sold the Dropboxes just taking off. And so if we'd waited a couple more years, it probably would have been like great. So some things do take a while. I do tell founders of companies I help out or invest in that having a startup it's a memoryless distribution, meaning that investors will say like, oh, you've been working on this for a while, must not be going well. But as the founder of that company, you can kind of take off at any point if you still have ideas, if you're still iterating. So I don't mind being patient for something and like not worrying too much about other people who are like moving faster or kind of doing other things. It does come together. Sometimes those things aren't sticky though. Like some of the companies that I've invested in have done really well, like really fast to 5 million in ARR. They aren't defensible or they aren't sticky. And so they'll have like a high churn rate. So there are a lot of things to keep an eye on. And some product that looks great at this cycle might not like survive as long as you might think. So I love reading about them. They're really fun. I don't let that make me feel bad about like where we should be or need to be with what we're working on. I just try to keep more of an eye on like, what are users telling me? What do people like? How do we be patient? I do also think it's interesting that companies that are doing well often don't want other people to know about it for a while.
mhm,
So like Meta in the early days, when it was Facebook, didn't want to tell anyone that it was doing as well as it was doing. So, that's because there's a period of time where you don't want to invite more competition to what you're doing. So when people choose to have press around it, that tells me something about it. But press is only useful for like selling to enterprises, for recruiting, if like that's your bottleneck, or like trust. But there are a lot of tools that are just like kind of unknown until they're big. And when they're big, the press doesn't really matter. And it's not what made them get where they are today.
For sure. I totally agree with you. I feel like a lot of people are just like being quietly rich. And like you really should like focus on like what you're doing than publicizing before it's like has like product market fit. When it comes to like pricing and fundraising, so like I think when you're designing the DocSend like price, there was like, a $10 tier, there's like a 200 something dollar tier, and then there's like different tiers, right? So for your new startup, like how do you think about, and then also I feel like one thing you mentioned in the other podcast episodes, like where kind of you're saying that like essentially like you guys were like a consumer company than like just like a SaaS until like the end it's like a SaaS company. Basically you were saying like you start with the consumer first, like consumer share link to other consumer. And when you're designing like a B2B and B2C coexisting product, like how do you think about the profit margin as well as like, how to like kind of like price the product to make it like effective to target both and customers?
Yeah. Also a lot of good questions all together. And
Sorry,
maybe
my
no, it's
cougher.
great. This gives me a good menu of what to answer first. Yeah, with DocSend, it started off being free for a while, just trying to build something people like. And then we're like, I don't know. We thought it would take off like crazy, and it didn't. We were waiting for that, like, it's got to be huge tomorrow, right? And if it's not huge tomorrow, I guess it's a huge failure. But like some things just take a while. And also it's kind of annoying when you're in the middle. You're like, it's growing, but not hugely. What do we do? Do we stay? Do we leave? Like, and so for DocSend for a while, it's like plodding along. We put in a $10 a month like plan because we're like, we should charge people something. And then it wasn't until later when we figured out like what people wanted and what they were willing to pay that it unlocked kind of us getting our plans and pricing more in line with what made sense to people. So, competing with a data room like Interlinks that's like $20,000 a year. If you're looking at like, $20,000 a year or $10 a month, this cannot be the same thing. Like it's actually worse for you to be cheap. It's not good. So our conversion rate for DocSend actually went up when we started charging $250 a month. And you could pay month to month, which is great. And so it's like $2,000 a year. And so you're like 2,000 versus like 20,000, like that's insanely cheap, but like maybe it's the same. And we didn't have all the features, but we had most of the features you cared about. So conversion went up when we raised our prices. So in retrospect, I wish I had done that research earlier for DocSend. Like, what are people willing to pay? Because some people would be like, oh, unless it's free, I don't care. So a lot of people, like, we shouldn't have cared about their feedback. And then a lot of people were comparing us to like a Dropbox or something, which maybe for the send and track a PDF functionality, that's where that is. But then for like data room or like anything where control is important, like that price point like should have been higher. So I like being transactionally priced, where you're cheaper than the upmarket option, but easier to use, easier to understand, maybe not all the bells and whistles, but a lot cheaper. Like I like sitting there. Also as a business, to your point about like margins, you don't have an acquisition cost. So if you're kind of selling at market, you've got a big sales engine, big marketing engine. That's a lot of money you're spending that you need to recoup from your customer. So like as the customer of a piece of software, if you're going to like like Dreamforce or something, or you're seeing a lot of ads, like you're talking to the salesperson who's selling you, like you're going to pay for them if you become a customer. Like that money you're sending to them, a lot of that's going into their acquisition. It does tie back to LTV and stickiness and other things, but for the category I like working on, it is nice to be transactionally priced there because you can afford to be transactionally priced if your acquisition comes from less expensive means. So for Distill, what I did at the beginning was I went off and interviewed a lot of like recruiters and salespeople and like investors and like CEOs, but these are also people I already know from DocSend. So I'm cheating a little bit because I already know a bunch of these people. I've already been talking to them about like the DocSend value prop. So the Distill value prop, I get to just ask them about a different part of their workflow. and then asking them like, what do you use? What would you pay? How do you think about pricing? So I did a bunch of interviews because I wanted to make sure that if we are successful with acquisition and a product people like, then when I go like, hey, pay me now for this thing you're using, I'm not going to be surprised and be like, wow, I mean, maybe $2 a month or something. Or, it needs to be something they're willing to pay for. If they can get that way cheaper somewhere else, like in ChatGPT, that's a real concern. Although still, I'm not worried about it, given what we already talked about there. So I know people will be willing to pay for Distill later. I know like the price points that make sense. Like if you're paying for PitchBook, that's like $25K a year per user, which for some of what they do makes sense. Like Distill will never compete with them, but there are some people that are paying that much money where the only data they're using for PitchBook is data that's like in plain sight in public. So like we don't need to be, we can just like grab the public data. It's like just kind of a package it for them thing. So like they're happy to pay a few $100 a month for something that does what they want and it's easy to use and like there's a good price point there. Margins like COGS, like for DocSend, COGS are pretty low. Like we were like processing PDFs but people weren't like viewing a ton of them. They were like not that many visits, but they're very important visits, like your pitch deck. Like, what are the server costs of someone viewing your pitch deck? Nothing relative to like a ton of server traffic or something. So COGS were low. For Distill, it's possible for LLM costs to be very high. And so you're seeing that with a lot of like super compute intensive, like the frontier models, like it's going to replace all my coding and that sort of stuff. For Distill, what we wanted to do from the onset was make use of like the really cool stuff from a year ago now, because we're decomposing what we're talking about into small bite-sized chunks, and we're making the assumption that costs will come down over time and like accuracy will go up over time. So we built the system in a way that like costs are pretty easy control for. And like we talked about with the deep research stuff, like we have an index, so we don't have to every time go from scratch. We're saving information, which is great. So that brings down costs as well. So I think we'll have a pretty good profit margin later on. It's good to keep an eye out for, but all this pales in comparison to like the real challenge, which is like building something people really want and building something people like, and then building it in a way that actually has awareness built into it somehow.
Totally. What about, I mean, like I really like your philosophy about like, basically talking to your customer and then don't be scared to like upcharge like when your competitors are kind of like even significantly higher. And when it comes to like fundraising, like how do you think about fundraising today, since like you have two successful companies? I'm sure you can like pick most of the investors since you are a second time or third time founder. And how do you think about fundraising? And then what would be your suggestions for like if you're starting today again for like founders who are fundraising today for the first time?
Yeah, I'm just posting a link to an article. I wrote this up. I've had a bunch of people tell me, hey, you should write a book. And
yeah, also hi Kirby.
Oh, that's nice. Hi Kirby. That's cool. I get, a lot of people asking questions and like, oh, you should write a book. And then I've angel invested in, I don't know, close to 100 companies at this point, which I do mainly for the learnings and the way to stay involved and like see like more at bats, like have more, like live vicariously through other people's experiences. So I love seeing what they're doing. But yeah, I wrote this down just as like some thoughts on kind of process. It's mostly not related to Distill because a lot of it has to do with like process. It still is quite related to Distill in the sense of like, it's a quality, not a quantity game. Like do your research, like be targeted, like know why you're talking to someone. So like if you're going to go have like 30 meetings with like a potential lead investor for your pre-seed or seed round, they should be people who are a good fit for you. They should be able to lead. They should be people who have invested in your category historically. And so be thoughtful, be targeted, show up prepared. I just wrote down a lot of the thoughts I have and advice I have here. And it is written for someone who does not have success, because for your point, like in my situation, it's different. It's just much easier if it's your third company and you've sold your first two. So like the advice, when you're in my scenario, it is much easier to raise. It's much harder to raise when it's your first time. And that's the type of advice I like to pass on, and it's probably best done programmatically rather than one at a time. So yeah, for like this, like the FAQ is actually longer than the post.
The actual article.
Yeah, because it's like, oh man, all these could be other articles. How much money is involved? Yeah, like what type of diligence do they do? How much of the round does a lead investor take? How many potential leads should I talk to? Like, when do I give up? What do I tell people if I give up? Like, can I try again later if it doesn't work out now? There's like common questions I get. So this is a lot of my thoughts and advice on fundraising, but probably the most important part, and the part that's related to Distill, is to do your research, be targeted, know why people might invest in you. And so then when you go have your 30 conversations, if you get to know at the end of all of them, maybe you should change something about your business model, or even just how you describe what you're working on. So, this is hopefully helpful to people. And it's definitely a good use case for Distill, being able to like kind of search your network and extended network and add your advisors on Distill and see who they know. And then like, it takes so much time to like go through and like figure out like, what have they invested in? What does that company do? Is that company similar to my company? It's just a mind numbing, because if you want to have 30 meetings, you're going to have to look at 100 plus, VC funds, and then like narrow it down. And then are you going to cold email them? Okay. If you're going to ask someone, who do you ask? And then how do they know them? It's just like you look at the amount of effort that goes in there, like Distill can dramatically shrink that so that you can be thoughtful about doing your fundraising with less time invested. So this has been very fun for me, both think about and to help companies with, and as a use case for Distill, although it is not the primary thing Distill does, or it's not the limit. The Distill isn't going to be like a vertical just fundraising tool. It's just useful for fundraising, along with like other use cases like sales and recruiting.
For sure. I feel like Distill probably can just answer a lot of these like research related questions on its own. I wonder when, like, I guess like when looking back, like I guess like one of the questions I personally got the most about, like I also consult some founders as well as like just like being on intro, like a lot of like super talented people have throw the link in the chat. Yes, I will. Like actually I don't know if I can. Yeah, let me I'll
It's
throw
just
this.
up on the distill.fyi
Yeah,
under
yeah.
resources too.
Let me post it here, and then yeah, I think I just publicly post it.
Oh,
Great article. Okay, yeah, sorry. Oh my
okay.
God. Oh, okay. Clearly I post on YouTube and stuff. But okay, so okay, thank you, Kirby. Okay. So um I wonder when, I guess like when it comes to like narrowing down, I guess like when, let's say if an investor invests in like adjacent company in the same category, how do you process that information? Do you still pitch? Because I think a lot of the company, so on Monday we had like the all ventures partner on, so they only invest in education, but a lot of the company end up becoming in like adjacent or like kind of like having a lot of overlap. How do you think about like pitching investor that's just like category specific, and then they may invest in like a adjacent slash future competitor in the past, like, or how do you kind of like decide to pitch or not pitch?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will use this as an opportunity to rant a little bit about the expectations some people have of AI, where they're like, can't it just do everything for me? Just have it give me tons of money. Just have it do all the things. But it is interesting that people are figuring out what is it capable of, what can it do, what can't it do, and the capabilities are changing really fast. So it's like kind of hard to keep a handle on. As it relates to fundraising, AI can not yet just give you $5 million. Unfortunately, people are trying to promise that, but money is still finite, and getting it from people requires thoughtfulness and some preparation and thinking and work. And so for like the process in Distill of like, how do you pick who to go pitch? There's the whole part that is like, what are you pitching and like, what are you working on, which is a separate set of stuff. And DocSend dealt more with like that. For Distill, let's assume you've got a good pitch and you're getting feedback and you know what it is. Like, how do you decide who to pitch? The answer is it depends. Like if you're, let's say one seed fund does a lot of ed tech, that could be great for you because they already do ed tech, you're doing ed tech. And so then you can compare, but then you have to go look at those companies, because one of them might be like directly competitive to you. Like who you're targeting, they would only use one or the other. And so some seed funds are okay with that and some are not. And you might be okay with that and you might not be. On the other hand, there's some other seed fund that only does fintech. And you're like, well, they have nothing competitive. That's great, right? But they also don't do ed tech. So probably don't pitch them if they have no historical evidence of having done anything in your category. And then it's also worth looking at the people at a fund. There might be someone new at a fund who's previously done investing very related to you. And the fund hasn't yet, but the person has at that fund. So you might want to go pitch them specifically there. So you have to go do this research. You got to go read about the company and what does it do. And then it's like, it just takes time. And so if you don't do that, then you run the risk of even if you get the meetings, a lot of founders I talk to are like, oh, I just need to get the meetings. It's like, that's not the goal, because if the meetings aren't a good fit, it's a waste of your time. And your time as the founder is very important. You're not just pitching blindly. Like you get into a meeting and let's just say they're trying to get information out of you because one of their investments is competitive with you. They're like, oh, sure, we'll take the pitch from you. You're just going to tell us some new ideas that we'll pass on to our competitive investment. Obviously not a good use of your time. So when deciding if I should even reach out to or find an intro to this fund, that's why you need to go do a little bit of reading about them. And you're much more likely to get an intro or to even get a response in a meeting if you are able to say, I saw you invest in this company and that company. They're related, but not competitive. I thought you might appreciate our approach to this because of this stuff. That takes so much time to do, to send 100 of those. So that's the sort of thing with Distill I'm trying to help people be better at. But on the receiving end of these things, oh my God, it's so nice when someone is thoughtful and has done some work for me, because then I feel special and they care and I'm going to take that meeting. So anyway, to answer your question, it depends. You have to look at the specifics of it, and it's a judgment call. So
I also feel like another question is I had was in the, I guess, emerging manager / VC space, or maybe we can go back to the startup space. Everybody need introduction. So everybody is trying to require warm intro and stuff. How do you navigate that? Since I'm pretty excited about Distill, probably gonna tell me who knows who. But before that happened, yes, I'm super excited to try it. How do you think about asking for that warm intro from a friend, or if you don't have any warm intro, how do you effectively build one?
So I do get this question from people. They're like, I don't know nobody in tech. Introduce me to VCs. And for someone who's sufficiently outside of tech, the answer is probably go take a job at someone else's startup, work there for a while, meet some people, go get a job at a big tech company, meet some people, or join an incubator. Speaking of growth hacking for StartX, which is Stanford's incubator, I've mentored there for a long time. We built out a list of all their alumni and Distill that you can then do this really cool natural language search on top of, looking for which alumni have blogged about robots. It's there's no way to do that otherwise. How would you look up that? Because where are the people now? What have they done since then? So it's a self-updating directory. But go join something like StartX. You're going to meet people. You're going to have an alumni network to take advantage of, to get intros through. So you got to at least have something. Get an advisor or two. But then let's say you do have an advisor or two. You have some people. There can be too much choice is another problem. And do they even know them at all? So this still isn't perfect, because we don't know if you're in the same, I don't know, small dog weekend meetup club or something that's not online anywhere. But we can say oh, this person worked with them, or this person invested in their company. This still will find cool things looking at one person. It's oh, this person worked at the VC fund that invested in this person's last company. And you're like, oh yeah. Maybe they're just connected on LinkedIn, but that doesn't tell me a whole lot. Knowing that they have that relationship, they know each other, So that's pretty helpful. So one feature we added in Distill is seeing mutuals, and mutuals are sourced from different places. You can filter them by job title or something else, but then we try to do the work for you of how might they know each other, and we're not perfect, right? But it's as if you were going off and reading all their Distill profiles and just the pairwise comparison, and then try to rank order them by that. Because you're oh, I don't know them very well, but it looks like they know them super well, or I know that person super well, but they might not know each other. And so trying to cut down on how many people you have to ask for an intro from, because also the more thoughtful those asks are, the more likely they are going to be to succeed. So it's a lot of work. And I do recommend finding an advisor or two that has a network that can make intros for you, or getting like an angel investor. Like a cool tactic I like is get an angel investor, give them some equity in your company on top of like them investing, but then use them to like make intros to you. So they can say like, I'm investing in Grace's company, I'm really excited about it. But then for you to take advantage of the network, it's nice if you can search their network on their behalf and then tell them who you think is going to be best. Because the person making the intros might be busy, might not have time to like do the work for you. But if you can do the work on their behalf, then you can be more targeted in what you're asking them for. So all this stuff takes time and is complicated, but it's part of the reason why I think Distill is interesting to work on, where a lot of this information is out there and LLMs can actually connect the dots for you and help do some of the work for you so that it's easier to be thoughtful.
For sure. On that note, I want to give like a quick 1 minute fire round for you. Okay, so what's your favorite book?
Oh, I love Poor Charlie's Almanac. I read that last year finally, and it was just so good. I thought it would be kind of like a Spanish book, but it just was a lot about behavioral psychology. It's just Charlie Munger's like 10 speeches, I think, that he gave. He wasn't very prolific in writing or speeches in his life, but it's really insightful.
Love that. I actually just got that book from iFlyVC. I like spoke at their consumer summit in May, and then they just like sent me like the book as like a gift, and then I'm totally plan on hardcore reading it. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who would I invite to a dinner party? I just recently had my first kid, so I'd be like, oh, I don't know, like other parents, other funders who like have kids. We live in New York, although we have a place in Whistler, and we're in Whistler now. So the dinner party in New York would just be people. New York is busy; it's hard to get everyone to catch up. So whenever we do throw dinner parties there, I like invite friends who I just try to get together and see regularly. So.
Love that. Congrats again. Who made the
Thanks.
biggest impact? Who made the biggest impact in your career?
I mean, over the years, it's been just like a lot of people who have helped in a variety of ways. So I've been fortunate to have like good like mentors, although they're not like a traditional mentor, just people who help out, people who invested in my first startup, just bosses I've had at companies over the years. Like Gokul, who was the sponsor at Meta, who invested in DocSend and has helped out with Distill as well. Like him has been really helpful. Even just like co-founders over the years, like peers, like working with, like Lewis and Nick on the first company, or Dave and Tony on DocSend for, worked together for like 10 years straight. And then 3 years before that, and then we went to undergrad together. So they've been pretty formative.
Love that. Where can we find you outside of work?
Whistler right now. So we have a place here and spend winters here and ski here, and we'll see if we end up moving here for a few years too. So Whistler's a good bet, especially starting next year. Otherwise, New York dinners, seeing people, or just trying to go to the gym, stay in like relatively good shape so I can make sure to keep up with kids,
Oh my God. That's a lot of like actual work to keep up with the kids. But Russ, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a fun conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. This is a lot of fun.
Let me quickly end stream.